Ukraine's road from hope to conflict. Everything you need to know. In the final months of 1991, as the Soviet Union crumbled, Ukraine seized its long-awaited moment to forge its own destiny. On August 24th, the nation declared its independence, a move overwhelmingly confirmed by a popular referendum in December of that same year. This act marked the rebirth of a sovereign state on the map of Europe, a country rich in history and culture finally free from centuries of external rule. The Ukrainian people looked to the future with immense hope, ready to build a democratic society and a market economy, establishing their own institutions, currency, and military, and taking their rightful place among the community of nations. However, this newfound independence came with a complex and dangerous inheritance. Ukraine found itself in possession of the world's third-largest nuclear arsenal, a vast collection of warheads, bombers, and missiles left behind by the Soviet military. This immense power presented both a potential deterrent and a significant global risk, making the young nation a focal point of international concern. The United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia were especially keen to see these weapons dismantled to prevent nuclear proliferation. For Ukraine, the weapons were a powerful bargaining chip, but also a heavy burden to maintain and secure. This critical situation led to a landmark agreement in 1994, known as the Budapest Memorandum. Ukraine made the monumental decision to relinquish its entire nuclear stockpile and join the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. In return for this historic act of disarmament, Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom provided security assurances. They formally pledged to respect Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and existing borders. It was a trade of unprecedented scale. Tangible weapons of mass destruction were exchanged for diplomatic promises of security and territorial integrity, a deal intended to secure Ukraine's future and strengthen global stability. The years that followed were a period of nation-building, marked by both progress and persistent challenges. Ukraine navigated the difficult transition from a command economy to a free market, while also working to consolidate its democratic institutions. The political landscape was often turbulent, reflecting a society grappling with its identity and its place between Europe and Russia. The security assurances of the Budapest Memorandum were seen as the bedrock of the nation's safety, allowing it to focus on internal development without the existential threat of its powerful neighbor. This belief, however, would be profoundly and tragically tested in the decades to come. The fragile peace was shattered in 2014, following months of massive pro-European street protests in Kiev, known as the Revolution of Dignity. Ukraine's pro-Russian president, Viktor Yanukovych, fled the country. Russia responded with swift and decisive military action, citing the need to protect ethnic Russians. Russian forces, wearing unmarked green uniforms, moved to occupy key strategic points across the Crimean Peninsula. This region, historically part of Russia but transferred to the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic in 1954, was home to a major Russian naval base. The operation was executed with speed, leaving Ukraine and the world stunned. In March 2014, Russia formally annexed the Crimean Peninsula after staging a hastily organized and internationally condemned referendum. This act was a blatant violation of international law and a direct repudiation of the promises made in the Budapest Memorandum. The annexation sent shockwaves across the globe, demonstrating Russia's willingness to use military force to redraw borders in Europe. For Ukraine, it was a devastating blow, a loss of sovereign territory, and a clear signal that the security assurances it had relied upon were effectively worthless when challenged by one of its signatories. Simultaneously, another conflict began to smolder in Ukraine's eastern industrial heartland, the Donbas region. Russia began to actively support, fund, and arm separatist groups in the provinces of Donetsk and Luhansk. What started as protests soon escalated into a full-blown armed conflict. Russian operatives, volunteers, and eventually regular military units crossed the border to fight alongside the separatists, turning the region into a protracted war zone. This hybrid war allowed Russia to deny direct involvement while destabilizing Ukraine and preventing its government from consolidating control over its own territory. The conflict in the Donbas settled into a grim, grinding war of attrition that would last for 8 years. A fragile ceasefire, brokered through the Minsk agreements, was repeatedly violated by both sides, but it largely failed to stop the fighting. By early 2022, the war had already claimed over 14,000 lives and displaced more than 1 million people. It created a deep and painful wound within Ukrainian society, a constant reminder of Russian aggression and the ongoing threat to the nation's sovereignty. This simmering conflict was the dark prelude to a much larger and more devastating chapter. On February 24, 2022, the world watched in horror as Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine from the north, east, and south. Nearly 200,000 troops poured across the border in the largest military assault in Europe since World War II. Russian President Vladimir Putin declared a special military operation, with stated goals of demilitarizing and denazifying Ukraine, preventing its alignment with NATO, and questioning its very right to exist as an independent state. Missiles rained down on cities across the country, including the capital, Kiev, as armored columns advanced in a multi-pronged offensive aimed at a swift and total victory. Despite the overwhelming military superiority of the invading forces, Ukraine's response was one of fierce and unified resistance. From the first hours of the invasion, the Ukrainian military, hardened by 8 years of war in the Donbas, fought back with remarkable courage and tactical skill. Ordinary citizens joined territorial defense units, took up arms, and organized to support the war effort. The leadership of President Volodymyr Zelensky, who refused to leave Kiev and rallied his people with defiant messages, became a symbol of national resilience. The initial Russian plan to capture the capital in a matter of days failed completely. The human cost of the war quickly became catastrophic. Russian forces, frustrated by their lack of progress, resorted to indiscriminate shelling and bombing of civilian areas. Cities like Mariupol, Kharkiv, and Chernihiv were subjected to brutal sieges, resulting in widespread destruction and immense loss of life. The UN has confirmed over 13,500 civilian deaths as of mid-2025, though the true number is believed to be much higher. Millions of Ukrainians were forced to flee their homes, creating the largest refugee crisis in Europe since the 1940s. The war's brutality, including evidence of war crimes in towns like Bucha, horrified the international community. By the autumn of 2022, Ukraine mounted successful counteroffensives, liberating significant territory in the northeast around Kharkiv and in the south, including the city of Kherson. This demonstrated that with sufficient support, the Ukrainian military could push back the occupying forces. The war, however, was far from over. It evolved into a grueling battle of attrition along a vast front line stretching over 1,000 kilometers. Russia, after Sham referendums, illegally annexed 4 more Ukrainian regions: Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia, further entrenching its war aims and making any negotiated settlement immensely more difficult. As the conflict entered 2025, it had become a grinding stalemate, a brutal war fought in trenches and shattered cities. Russia now controls roughly 20% of Ukraine's internationally recognized territory, including most of Luhansk and significant parts of the other annexed regions. The fighting is characterized by intense artillery duels, drone warfare, and costly infantry assaults for small territorial gains. The human toll continues to mount relentlessly. Open-source estimates suggest staggering military casualties on both sides, with Ukraine officially acknowledging over 46,000 soldiers killed, while Russian losses are estimated to be several times higher. The nation lives under the constant threat of missile and drone strikes. International support has been a critical lifeline for Ukraine's defense. The NATO alliance and its partners have provided unprecedented levels of military, financial, and humanitarian aid. In 2023, the NATO-Ukraine Council was formed, giving Kiev an equal seat at the table for discussions about its security. The alliance also removed a key procedural hurdle for Ukraine's future membership. Pledges for security assistance have continued, with tens of billions of euros committed annually to supply Ukraine with advanced weaponry, ammunition, and training through initiatives like the NATO Security Assistance and Training for Ukraine, or NSATU, based in Germany. This unwavering support has been vital, but the political landscape is shifting. The United States, under President Donald Trump, has been pushing for a peace deal, even threatening tariffs on countries trading with Russia to force a ceasefire. This has created uncertainty among allies and put immense pressure on Ukraine to negotiate from a position of weakness. Russia's demands remain unchanged: recognition of its territorial annexations and Ukraine's neutrality. For Ukraine, accepting these terms would mean surrendering its sovereignty, and rewarding aggression, making any lasting peace seem impossibly distant. The story of Ukraine's journey since 1991 is a profound lesson in the fragility of international order and the high price of freedom. A nation that voluntarily gave up nuclear weapons in exchange for security guarantees found itself invaded by one of the guarantors. Its struggle is not just for its own survival, but for the principle that national borders cannot be changed by force, and that sovereign nations have the right to choose their own destiny. Ukraine's tumultuous history, from the hopeful independence of 1991 to the brutal reality of 2025, has become a defining conflict of our time, with consequences that will resonate globally for decades to come.